Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Capriccio's really remarkable and interesting Modern Times edition. Have you seen this sitting around? I was amazed. The record industry is so screwed up. They come out with these fascinating projects. This really is a fascinating project. And then they don't tell anybody that they exist. And you have to somehow find them yourself. I'd heard a couple individual discs in this series. And I reviewed actually one of them, at least, the Ginastera disc for ClassicsToday.com. But I had no idea there was like a series out there, or that it was all put together in a nice little box with a nice booklet with notes. I mean, who knew? Who was going to say anything about it? But yes, here it is, 10 CDs plus a bonus CD in which the conductor of this thing, Karl-Heinz Steffens, talks about the design and concept behind the entire project, and which I would rather slit my wrists than watch, so I haven't. But forget the bonus CD, which to me is not a bonus. It's a torment. I mean, there's nothing more awful than watching these people talk about themselves. I mean, it really is just one of these peculiarities of modern artistic life, that these people are under the illusion that they're interesting and that they should do anything other than just shut up and play the music, right? Yeah, well, okay. So, here, what do we get? You get 10 discs here, each devoted to a different contemporary composer. And it's an amazing range of contemporary composers. That's what's so much fun about this. The inclusive nature of modernity, as defined here. Of course, this being a German project, the German people get a little bit more attention than anybody else. Perhaps not entirely fairly, because music, generally speaking, in the 20th century was far more interesting outside of Germany than it was inside of Germany. But who can blame them for trying and for giving a plug to the local folk? You know what I mean? So what do you get? You get one disc devoted to each of the following composers. You ready? Bernd Alois Zimmermann, Luigi Dalla Piccola, Henri Dutilleux, Alberto Ginastera, Karl Szymanowski, George Antheil, that's the American one, Ralph Vaughan Williams, Dmitri Kabalevsky, Ernst Krenek, and Paul Hindemith. I mean, that's quite a collection of modern composers, isn't it? But even more than just the names, some of which I think are quite enterprising and interesting, the repertoire is also very interesting, as often as not, and reflects some really smart planning. It really, really does. So I want to take you through it, one composer at a time, and we can play some samples, and we're going to have a little fun just going through everybody in the Modern Times edition, brought to us by the Deutsche Staatsphilharmonie Rheinland-Pfalz under Karl-Heinz Steffens on Capriccio. Yeah, baby. So it starts with Bernd Alois Zimmermann, who, as we all know, was the composer of Die Soldaten, that wild opera, and who eventually killed himself, which makes him an authentic 20th century German composer. Now, Zimmermann's style, such as it is, was very eclectic. It could have almost anything in it. It ranged from atonality to popular music to, it's a wild mixture of things, often happening simultaneously, which makes it all sound even more eclectic. And on this particular disc, you get Alagoana, which is subtitled his Capriccios Brasileiros. It's a ballet, believe it or not. Who knew he wrote that? And I'm going to play you a little bit of it. I'm going to play you a little bit of the fourth movement. It has 5 movements. And the fourth movement is something called Capriccio. And it's sort of kind of Brazilian, I suppose, in a way. I mean, depends on how you define Brazilian. But here is a bit of it. I mean, the funny thing about Germans, because Germany, they have no folk tradition. I mean, they may have had one at one point in history, but their art music never quite soaked up any sort of folk or nationalistic influence. It was just the art music influence. And so they had to go abroad like so many composers did. I mean, Brahms looked at the Hungarian dances, they adopted some. But the difference is this: whereas the French composers, when they, for example, did Spanish music, somehow made it sound even more Spanish than Spanish music, the Germans, there was no hope for it. They had to make it all sound German. And so this is, as you could hear, a sort of expressionist nightmare Brazilian music, this sort of clunky, thick, heavy, excessively scored, nasty Brazilian German music. And then you get, let's see, this other prelude for large orchestra called photoptosis, which sounds more like a disease than anything else. I mean, the title, not the music. The music doesn't sound like a disease. It sounds like Zimmermann. And then you have his Symphony in One Movement from 1953. And then finally his orchestral sketches from 1970, which is the year that he passed away, called Stille und Umkehr. And that's disc number 1. Disc number 2 is Luigi Dalla Piccola. You get his partita for orchestra, which is quite splendid. I really enjoy that. His 2 pieces for orchestra. Then 3 questions with 2 answers per orchestra. The title seems to be in English. And his variations for orchestra. That's really quite an assortment of Dalla Piccola's orchestral music. I don't have samples of that stuff, but I assure you it's really cool stuff. Oh, and finally oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong title. There we go, the page is stuck together. And then his Piccolo Musica Notturna, which is fairly well known among Dalla Piccola's pieces. And in the partita, there's a soprano solo, because almost everything Dalla Piccola wrote has like some vocal element in it, because he's Italian. And the soloist is Aranza Esinaro, the soprano. Very good soprano. Okay, CD3 is Dutilleux, who we all know and love. You get Metaballs. I love Metaballs, which was a George Sell Cleveland Orchestra commission. And the 2 sonnets of Jean Cassou and his Symphony No. 1, which is gorgeous, beautiful, beautiful work. For Ginastera, who is CD No. 4, you get the Overture to the Creole Faust, the Obertura para el Fausto Criollo, and Olante, which was the sort of, it's a wonderful symphonic triptych. It's lovely, and it's usually coupled with the Estancia Ballet that everybody knows and loves. They kind of Penambi. Those are like the 3 like popular Ginastera orchestral works that go together. And then we get the Variaciones Concertantes. Beautiful, beautiful lyrical work of Boston Symphony Commission, if I'm not mistaken. And finally, the world premiere recording of the opera suite from his expressionist opera, Bomarzo. Ooh, this is something. It's all crazy textured, ooky, spooky textures. And that's the one I reviewed on ClassicsToday.com. You could look at the review there. It's really cool. It's really, really cool. His 2 operas, Bomarzo and Don Rodrigo, are absolutely nuts. And Bomarzo has been recorded. It's on Sony. And it's actually available, or it was until rather recently. Then CD5 is Szymanowski. Oh, I love Szymanowski. This is so much fun. You get his Concert Overture Opus 12, which sounds like, Richard Strauss getting lost on the way to Poland. And then you have the Sinfonia Concertante, however you want to call it, for piano and orchestra, which is also his 4th symphony. And then you get his Slopievnia, which are a bunch of songs for soprano and orchestra, which are quite lovely. And of course, you don't get text and translations. It's an inexpensive set. I mean, who needs them? They're only in Polish. And you get the Nocturne and Tarantella, which is quite lovely as well. Now, I'm going to play you a bit of the Symphonia Concertante, because let's put it this way. one of the things when you have an enterprising set like this, you've got an orchestra that's not the greatest orchestra in the world, even though they're quite accomplished, and a young, conductor full of youth and enthusiasm and energy, and no one knows this music at all. They have no idea. And they're operating on a limited time frame and a limited budget, and you really don't know, unless you know all of this music, and nobody, who knows all of this music, unless you've heard multiple recordings by other people, you really don't know how good the performances are. And from what I can tell, they seem to be pretty good. They have the notes. There's a little bit of caution, perhaps, in the interpretations. But one thing I can say about this performance of the Symphony Concertante, which has been recorded many times, it was written for Arthur Rubinstein. Even he made a mono recording of it. It's in the edition, Well, this performance is a hot mess. It really is. It's just slow. It's cautious. And it's a very densely scored piece, especially in the finale. And, one of the funny things about, what you might call, Germans, when they try to do Brazilian music, remember how it came out sounding like some sort of German expressionist nightmare? Well, here they're doing Polish folk-influenced music, and it comes out sounding like a German expressionist nightmare. In fact, it sounds just like Bernd Alwa's Zimmermann. It's sort of hard to tell them apart. Anyway, I want to play you the end of the Symphony Concertante, and then I'm going to play you a normal performance of it, just so you can tell what it's supposed to sound like. And I don't mean this as a horrible criticism. This is not terrible, but it's slow, and it's texturally confused, and there's a certain kind of charming, kind of a gawky charm in the way it all comes out sounding equally clunky and clotted and German. I can't help it. It's just so funny. It's almost sweet. It's such a mess. So here is a bit of the Symphony Concertante. Oh, let me tell you who the pianist is. Poor hapless chap. Wait a minute here. Let me just get this page here. Ready? Okay, there it is. Yes, here we go. Oh, the pianist is Eva Kupiec, who's fabulous. That's right. She's a wonderful pianist. She knows the work backwards and forwards. She's just a superb pianist. Unfortunately, she's stuck in, shall we say, unfamiliar territory. It's not really her fault. The balances are sort of favor the orchestra anyway. Anyway, they say, here, just listen to this. I'm sure Miss Kupiec is blushing. Really, I'm sure she is. So now here is the same thing played by Jan Krzysztof Brocha, piano, and the Warsaw Philharmonic under Antoni Witt, a genius, fabulous Polish conductor of Polish music, on Naxos, fantastic series of the Szymanowski symphonies. And boy, is there a bit of a difference. Like you can hear the tune. There is a tune in there in that mess of stuff. Here it is. up to tempo also does wonders. So yeah, I mean, you have to listen with a bit of indulgence and assume that some of the pieces may have better performances elsewhere, but it's the thought that counts, right? Of course. Then there's George Antheil. You get his Jazz Symphony for 3 pianos and orchestra. That's oodles of fun. And the Orchestral Suite Capital of the World, and his first piano concerto, and the Rumba Archipelago. It's a fun Antheil collection. And I really like the fact that they chose not like Copland, not the usual American composer. I think that's a fine idea. And for the English, we get Vaughan Williams. What is he doing in this company? Well, and what an interesting collection of stuff. You get the Poison Kiss Overture in the Fen country, the nicest music ever written about a swamp. It's lovely. And then you get the Bucolic Suite, which has only been recorded, I think, once before. It's on Dutton. It's an early work from 1900, very charming. And the Fantasia on Sussex Folk Tunes for cello and orchestra, and the 3 portraits from the film, The England of Elizabeth. Now, that's an eclectic Vaughan Williams selection, isn't it? Very, very interesting. And I have a bit of the Bucolic Suite for you to listen to and enjoy. It's really charming. It's nice, early Vaughan Williams, and the performance is robust and jolly, and it's not very hard, and it doesn't come out sounding like Bernd Alwast Zimmermann, because I think the nature of the idiom precludes that happening, even when German people who don't know the music very well are playing it. So here it is. Delightful, isn't it? Very, very, very charming. Then, let's see, CD 8 we're already up to. Kabalevsky. Isn't that amazing? You get his Overture Pathétique in B minor. This is the socialist realist school of modernity, by the way. That's what this is. And his Rhapsody on the theme of the song School Years for piano and orchestra, which is very socialist and very realist. And then you have his violin Concerto in C major, Opus 48, and his symphonic poem Vesna, which is spring, which is very spring-like and very spring in the socialist paradise. And finally, Kolos Broignan. I mean, what a famous piece, the Overture and Suite. The Overture is a little under tempo, perhaps. I don't know, maybe a little bit. But it's charming, and the Suite's delightful. It has the People's Feast, and the People's Calamity, and the People's Insurrection. So it's all about the people. Isn't that marvelous? Okay, so there you go. That's the Kabalevsky one. Yes. Finally, next to finally, we have Ernst Krenek. Now, Krenek's style was all over the place. He did everything, a little bit of everything. He wound up being basically atonal, but until he got to that point, remember his famous piece was the jazz opera Johnny Spielt Auf. So he was also another one of those very, very eclectic guys. But he didn't sound like Bernd Alwast Zimmermann. Well, yeah, he did a little bit, but depends on what he was doing. You get his potpourri, which is lots of fun, and his 7 orchestral pieces, and Tricks and Trifles, the latest work from 1945, and that's a world premiere recording, and it's completely atonal and sort of hard to take, and his Symphony Palace Athene from 1954. So there's Krenek. And finally we come back to Hindemith, who always sounds like Hindemith. But this, again, is a very, very interesting selection of music by Hindemith. You have the News of the Day, Neues vom Tage Overture, which is busy, and Neue Sachlichkeit. It's very sachlich. That's the new objectivity. It couldn't be more objective. I mean, you could just like walk out into the street and trip over it. That's how objective it is. And then there's the Philharmonisches Concert, which was written for the Berlin Philharmonic, actually, if my memory doesn't deceive me. And Furtwängler actually had to conduct it, and probably hated the thing. It's busy, very busy. And then you get his early expressionist opera, Das Nushi, the Dance Suite, which is great fun. But the real gem in the Hindemith pile of stuff is the Drei Gesänge, the 3 songs for soprano and orchestra, Opus 9. It's from 1917. It's very, very early. And it sets 3 completely wacky poems. I mean, they are, let's see, My Nights Are Rent by Horse Screaming. Doesn't that sound jolly? And then you get World's End, and finally, Revolt of the Young. Yes, Aufbruch der Jugend. And this is just a real hoot. It's for a soprano with a death wish. Let me put it to that. It's written, I have the score. The score's like this. It's huge. It's written for an enormous orchestra and a soprano who wants to have no career after she has completed singing the song. And I am going to play you the end of this song as sung by the incredibly intrepid and possibly foolhardy Valda Wilson. Good for you, dear. I don't expect to ever see you turning up on another disc after this. Here is the end of Revolt of the Young, or of Youth, from Hindemith's Drei Gesänge. Wow, baby. Unreal, isn't it? And so that, my friends, is the Modern Times edition. I mean, it's incredible fun. If you're collecting this stuff, you've got to have it. I mean, if you're a collector, it's such a wonderful perspective on the really first half of the 20th century, let's just say. You know, the modern period when all kinds of things were going on, all kinds of things were happening in music, everything from folky Vaughan Williams-y English folky tonality to crazy atonality to total eclecticism to jazz to pop music influences to ethnic nationalist to socialist realism. I mean, it's all here. And it's well recorded and mostly well played, you know, aside from the Szymanowski. I mean, it's well played, it's a little unidiomatic, but it's all here. It's a wonderful taste, a taste of all of that. And what a fun way to spend an afternoon dipping in and playing around with some of that stuff. So, there you go. Again, it's the Deutsche Staatsphilharmonie Rhineland-Pfalz under Karl-Heinz Steffens on Capriccio. Keep on listening, folks. Thanks for joining me. Take care.